Hey, stop me if you heard this before, but the Raiders did something weird today. Stop if you heard this before, but the Raiders did what the Raiders do. And they fired my good friend Tom Telesco less than a year on the job. Yeah. I guess I'm supposed to be surprised, but why would I actually be surprised at the Raiders? Right? Why would I actually be surprised? And I get it. Whoever they're hiring as a head coach, there's a world there where had Bill Belichick had any desire to consider working for the Raiders as their head coach, and again, there's various reports that people called and he has said he's not interested, but he would have wanted his own guy. And many people want their own guy. But that's I gotta say, I gotta tell you, if you look at, he drafted one first-round pick. Was Brock Bowers any good? And maybe you could say, hey, Brock Bowers was going to be good regardless whoever drafted him. But he was good. And, he got something for Devontae Adams, who didn't want to be a Raider. They didn't go and draft some quarterback who stunk. They just stood pat for a year, knowing that this was ultimately coming. Did the best they could. And am I defending him because he's a friend of mine? Sure. Am I defending him because I thought he actually did a good job with the Chargers? Sure. And he comes from good stock? Again, if we're actually real about it, my conversations with Tom last year, he's like, look, I was 11 years with the Chargers. Most times you lose a job, you're never getting back to that level. He was stunned he even got the job. But if you get the guy the job, why don't you let him go through one cycle? Strikes me as really odd. It is odd. You know why? Because it's the Raiders. Right? Because it's the Raiders. And many of the things that both Mark and Al have done are ahead of the curve. Right? They were the first to move to L.A. and try and get a stadium done when they couldn't get their stadium deal done in Oakland. Right? You go back to the 80s, and that was huge, groundbreaking stuff. Of course, Al, with his ties to USC, it did make a lot of sense. He was the first to hire a black head coach. He was a trailblazer. Mark was the first to offer a coach and sign a coach to a $100 million deal. Again, all of this is ahead of the curve. And they fired coaches 1 year in. They fired general managers early on in their tenures. They fired lots of different people. So some of the things that are being done, the Raiders have actually done before. But you get to a level of dysfunction where it doesn't matter who it is. No one can succeed when it's a turnstile at head coach and a general manager. Right? No one. No one can succeed. So I don't have to apologize for Tom's record this year or what happened with the Chargers or the fact that the Chargers are better this year than last year. I think all of us, especially me and Jason, we weren't big Brandon Staley guys. And Staley did make the playoffs 2 years previously. They did have a big lead, and they did succumb to a Jags comeback. And, it's funny. I said this to a buddy of mine, here's the difference in PR. Brandon Staley goes for it, doesn't get it. He's an idiot. Dan Campbell goes for it, doesn't get it, and he's the greatest dude ever. He's Captain America. But that's what winning does, especially winning in the playoffs, and the Chargers haven't done that. But in the least surprising news ever, the Raiders do something that they didn't have to do just because their owner decided to do it. And my guess is this in some way relates to Tom Brady, and Tom Brady going yeah, do you want my suggestions? Sure. You want my money? Okay. Well, my suggestions have to come to life. And he doesn't have a relationship that much with Telesco. I know Telesco talked to him when Brady was a free agent. And it seems like whoever they focus on hiring, they're going to want a GM to marry with them instead of allowing Tom Telesco to hire a coach. Okay, it's your choice. But when you have this much turnover, this much of a turnstile, that's what ends up happening. The chances for success are remote. You have to have a consistency, a consistent voice. Give somebody a chance to build. And that's not the choice of Mark Davis. And Mark Davis has every right to make that choice. But we also have every right to go, this is the Raiders being the Raiders. There is no more Raider move than firing the head coach, and then firing the GM a day later after letting everybody know the GM was safe. I don't know what Tom Telesco's list looked like as far as head coaches he wanted, but maybe Mark didn't like that. If you had to say what's a weird franchise, and you took a look at Mark Davis, you go, yeah, that doesn't look normal. That terrible haircut, that copy of a copy with the Evel Knievel suit, that constant changing of coaches, that constant changing of GMs, that doesn't feel like everything else in the NFL, and it doesn't. So, I don't know. I'd be fascinated to see what happens now. Is there a world where they go back to Gruden? Because now Gruden apparently is a candidate again. I don't know. But I do know that this is just a very Raiders-esque move. Very Raiders-esque move. It's the Doug Gottlieb Show here on Fox Sports Radio. If you're just joining us, the news of the moment, and you probably heard Dan Byer with it, is the Raiders, a day after firing their head coach, end up firing their general manager. Rapid Radio is the official communication device of Fox Sports Radio, and Rapid Radios are instant push-to-talk walkie-talkies, offering national LTE coverage and no subscription or monthly fees. It's a great alternative to a mobile phone for your kids. We use them on the show. Go to rapidradios.com now for up to 60% off, plus free shipping. Go ahead, Dan.
It sure seems that in the NFL that GMs, and I know Telesco wasn't afforded this opportunity, but it almost seems like they get at most 2 bites at the apple nowadays. And there seems to be a time, there was a time in the NFL where the general manager was the general manager. The general manager would hire the head coach, and the coach would hire the staff, and if that didn't work out, coach and staff would leave, and that general manager would hire another head coach. And there was always this almost hierarchy, Doug, of power, owner, general manager, head coach. But general managers would get 3 bites at the apple, really, in terms of the coaches, the staff, and if 2 didn't work out, strike 3 was you're out. And now there seems to be this, just everything has got to be partnered and in lockstep. And I even found it funny in Tennessee when Rand Carthon got ran earlier this week, and they're keeping Brian Callahan, and I think that Brian Callahan's going to be a good head coach. They're going to have the first overall pick. But you're then bringing in a GM that didn't hire him. And so now the level of trying to succeed is, I don't want to say it's almost unattainable, but it's up there. And it just doesn't, things don't match up anymore. And it seems like we need either it be head coach and GM, and that's the only way it's going to work. But, these days of GMs being able to hire 2 and 3 head coaches, just not what it is anymore. And in a way, I guess I could see what the Raiders are doing because they maybe want their head coach and GM to be on the same page. But, man, it's just not like it was anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's really weird to have that dynamic. To have a GM who didn't hire the coach, it's very, very odd. Usually they're tied at the hip.
Lately, I would say.
It more so than you think. And look, it's like that for coaches hire other coaches who they work with before. Coaches bring in players who they've coached before. At my level, your AD, you're tied to your AD and to your president. They shared the same vision. So I think maybe we study it more. And again, I don't have historical knowledge of what happened in the 90s and maybe early 2000s or whatever when we first started this, but I would generally say last 20 years I've been doing this, it's more often than not. Is that fair?
I think it's a recent, I would say the last decade or so. So someone like A.J. Smith, who was there before Telesco was,
yes,
had a decade with the Chargers. Heck, even Telesco in his last gig was maybe one of the rare ones that was allowed to actually be the GM. But yeah. I just felt that it was, now everything is so urgent. Everything is such a quick turnaround. And there's I'm trying to think of other examples popping up in my head, but I just don't. I remember when, obviously, Mike Holmgren wanted GM powers, right? So that's why he left Green Bay. And I'm using the Seahawks as an example because Pete Carroll and John Schneider were kind of that. And now, that's 15 years ago. Boy, how time flies. But that seems to be like where Carroll had final say, but Schneider had his own sort of deal. Like that to me is kind of like the impetus of it. Like the start of this is, hey, he's going to be coming in as the head coach, but he's going to have significant power and final say on the roster and whatnot. And I just felt like there was this era before that wasn't the case. And now it's just everything is tied and having this one cohesive unit. And I'm not even sure if that's the best way to go because you're throwing everything out. At least, Jacksonville decided, all right, whether you like Trent Baalke or not, we're going to let him make the decision. And Sean Cobb said, don't throw the, baby out with the bathwater. Yeah. So, just a different time in the NFL.
Has anybody actually ever thrown the baby out with the bathwater?
I have not.
Well, part of it is we don't throw the bathwater out now. We let it down the drain. But I did wonder if anybody's actually ever thrown the baby out with the actual bathwater. That would be weird.